All right, well, good morning, everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. I think we have the core of the folks who are going to be here today. I know some folks may still be joining, but in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. So for those of you who may not know me, I'm Amanda Sternberg. I'm with the Homeless Action Network of Detroit. You've already received a lot of emails from me, and you will be receiving even more emails from me in the coming weeks and months as we kick off the local CoC competition. So let us just dive right into the content. Let me get myself situated here in just a moment. All righty. Okay. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be giving an overview of sort of a recap of the last year's, the 2023 competition, kind of how things worked, what happened there. We're going to be going into the timeline for this year's competition. Going to be going over, probably spending the majority of our time really talking about the project applications themselves. We're going to be talking a bit about the scoring criteria, not necessarily going into, all of the details, but definitely touching on some highlights, some key points. Going to be spending a couple of minutes talking about the appeals policy, because this is something that was revised from last year. So just to make sure that everyone is familiar with some of the changes that were made to that part of the process. I'm going to be talking about some sort of tips and tricks to ensure a successful submission when you're emailing these items to me. And of course, time for questions as well. So some housekeeping tips before we get started. So everyone is on mute. Feel free as we go along to come off of mute, use the raise your hand feature, put any comments or questions in the chat. Again, you can feel free to, kind of interrupt me as we go along. If the question that you ask is something that I'll be addressing later on, I may just kind of defer to, kind of when we get to that point. Today's webinar, which is being recorded, as well as let me double check, actually, that is recording. I'm pretty sure it's recording. As well as the slides are, yes, it is recording. Okay. So the recording from today's webinar, as well as the slides, will be posted to HAN's website within a couple of days. So attendance at this webinar was not required in order for you to submit your renewal application. It's highly encouraged. So if you're here, that's great. If you have other people at your agency who you think could benefit from watching this webinar as well, you can pass it on to them. If you want to go back and rewatch anything, you can, rewatch it when that recording is posted. So again, everything that we're going to be talking about today will be posted on our website. I give the URL for the website where everything will be posted, and I'll be sure to put this URL in the chat as well before the end of the meeting. Okay, so I want to start with a recap of the 2023 competition, or so last year's competition. I know that for some of you, this may be the first year that you're a part of submitting your agency's CoC applications. Some of you, you've kind of been around and done this for a while. So just going to kind of give a recap of what happened last year. So last year in the 2023 application process, HUD and made those award announcements on January 29th of this year. So a few months ago. The award announcements that they made were for projects that we submitted last September. And we were awarded a total of just over $35 million in both renewal funding and new project funding. That was about a little over a 9% increase in funding from last year's competition. So it was great to see us get that increased in funding. So this table, I know this is a lot of information and it's probably a little hard to read on the screen, but this is really just a summary of the projects and the funding amounts that we were awarded. So just kind of what I wanted to sort of point out here, a couple of things. The majority of the funding that we receive every year is what is called renewal funding. That is, for the renewal projects, again, what we're talking about today. That's the majority of the funding that we received. So it's continuing to fund your projects and the projects that we have currently operating in the CoC. Also, what you can see from this table is that the majority of our project funding is in permanent supportive housing projects. So both our renewal projects, and then we were able to bring on a couple of new PSH projects in last year's competition as well. The other thing I want to point out on this table, just so everyone is aware, you do see under CoC planning, $1.5 million in new funding. The CoC planning dollars are dollars that HUD receives as our role as the collaborative applicant. These are funds that are not awarded competitively, so they're not funds that could otherwise be used for housing or services. They're specifically for to support the work of the collaborative applicant. And they're called new because that's how HUD categorizes them every year as new funding, even though in reality they operate very much like renewals because it's continuing to fund the work that we do and that we have been doing. So it's just sort of a unique aspect to those dollars. But just wanted to point that out. When you see that 1.5 million, that's not funding, again, that we could otherwise have used for housing or services. It's only eligible to be used for the CoC planning kind of administrative work. Some additional details to these 2023 projects. All of our renewal projects were funded at the amounts that they were submitted for to HUD. Most of our projects saw a slight bump in their award from what they submitted for to what they received. HUD makes adjustments every year for adjustments in fair market rent or FMR. So if you're wondering why, well, your grant agreement, which you may not have received yet, but if you're wondering why your project was awarded a little bit more money than what you requested, that's because HUD makes those FMR adjustments. This table gives a snapshot of the new projects that we were awarded last year. So we were awarded 3 new projects, and I have indicated as well the funding source for those projects, whether they were funded using reallocated dollars or our CoC bonus dollars, which is our new funding. Just a quick word about what reallocated funding is. These are funds that were taken from a renewal project for a number of reasons. Some of our renewal projects had their budgets reduced in part, and those funds that were realized from that reduction were used to fund new projects. So you can see we were able to fund a new coordinated entry grant using reallocated dollars, and we funded 2 new permanent supportive housing projects. These were the 2 that were selected by HUD. One was funded solely with reallocated dollars, and the other one, the neighborhood legal services one, was funded using a combination of reallocated dollars and bonus funding. I will say on the project side, you know, when being funded by reallocated dollars isn't something that's really going to impact or change kind of how the project operates. Essentially, it's all new funding that's being used to fund that project. We also submitted these additional new projects were approved by the Continuum and submitted to HUD for funding. Unfortunately, they were not selected by HUD. So ultimately, these are new projects that we applied for that we did not receive. And these were projects that were funded with the rest of our CoC bonus dollars and with our domestic violence bonus dollars. So unfortunately, we didn't get everything that we asked for, but we were excited to get the 3 new projects that we did receive. These new projects were all ranked in tier 2, so meaning they were kind of at the bottom of our ranking list, which is impacts kind of why they were not selected by HUD for funding. So every year with the CoC competition, we get a score on the application that we submit, and that score is used as partly of what HUD uses to determine how much funding they're going to award us. So we did receive that score from HUD in February. An analysis of that CoC score was provided to the CoC board in March. We did a kind of a dive into areas that we performed well in, areas that we could improve upon. I will say certainly overall we performed quite well in the application. Certainly always some room for improvement, but overall we did score quite well within the competition. So in terms of for you, the agencies, you should be getting your grant agreements for your 2023 projects at some point. Maybe some of you have received them already, but you may also still be waiting on them. So the grant agreements that you're going to be receiving are for your projects that will start at some point this calendar year in 2024 and go through 2025. I know that we have a couple of our projects that have start dates early in the calendar year, so you may have had your 2022 grant may have already ended at some point in this calendar year, and you may be waiting for your updated grant agreement. If that is the case, I would really encourage you to reach out to your HUD rep if you have not done so already. Really, anything related to your grant agreements needs to go through your HUD rep. But again, they should be issuing those grant agreements and getting them out and getting them signed. Okay, so that's just a quick overview of last year's competition. So now we're going to move into this year. And wanted to start with giving just sort of a high-level overview of the timeline for the competition this year. And you do see on this timeline, I do reference when the new project applications are going to be released and when they're going to be due. It didn't say this at the top of the meeting, but just to reiterate, the meeting today, our discussion today is all related to renewal project funding. So you're currently receiving CoC funding and you want to continue to receive it. That's what we're talking about today. There will be another webinar in June when we talk about new project applications. So more to come on that piece of it. But regardless, here's the timeline that we're looking at, kind of the overarching timeline for this year's competition. So today is our webinar. Your applications and your attachments, everything are due to me by noon on June 14th, so just under a month. Let me kind of continue through the timeline here. Then again, in mid-June, we anticipate releasing the new project applications if you are interested or thinking that you may want to apply for new funding this year. Throughout July and August, we will be reviewing your renewal applications, doing the scoring. You'll be getting information on your score, on the appeals process. That will be happening over the course of June, from kind of June to August. Going back to July, we anticipate new project applications being due in late July. August, September time range is when you can anticipate entering your project applications into eSNAP. So that's the online portal that you have to ultimately submit these applications through. Once we move into September, we anticipate that the board will be making decisions on new project applications. Again, that's for the new applications. Then throughout September, we will be finalizing the project ranking, finalizing the application entry into eSNAPs. And then ultimately, we anticipate that everything will be due to HUD the end of September. So this timeline is very similar to what it was last year. Again, some of these precise dates, especially the eSNAP submission dates and all of that are still unknown because the NOFO, the Notice of Funding Opportunity, has not been released yet. But nevertheless, this will give you just hopefully an understanding of what to anticipate and what to plan for in the coming months. I also acknowledge that, I feel like we ruin everyone's summer every year by having to do the competition over the course of the summer months, but that is just the way it is. So the key thing to keep in mind for your renewal project applications, and I'm going to be saying this over and over again at this meeting. So if you leave today not knowing this, I'm sorry, but renewal project applications are due by noon on June 14th. So noon, 12 p.m. If I receive something at 12:01 p.m., it is late. And you will points will be reduced from your score accordingly. We'll talk a little bit later on about having points reduced because of late material submission. So again, this due date, the time that it's due, please make note of it. You will be sending everything to me via email. So please do not wait until 11:59 to hit that send button to me. Just please plan accordingly to make sure that you get everything in by noon. Again, 12:01 is late, so make note of that. Okay, again, this is the timeline. So, all right, we now are going to talk in some details about renewal project applications. All right. So who's being submitted for renewal? So any project that is where your current grant term is expiring in 2025 needs to submit for renewal. Again, that is all of our, the renewal projects. We do have, one new project that was just funded in last year's competition that may not have a grant agreement yet, but its term is still going to be expiring in 2025. So that project still needs to submit for renewal. And we'll talk a little bit later on again about first-time renewals. But essentially, your application or your current grant terms, which are ending in 2025, you need to submit for renewal so that when that grant term ends next year, you'll have funding to continue the program starting in 2025 and going into 2026. So unfortunately, we cannot guarantee renewal funding for all of our projects. There's a lot of factors that go into the funding of the projects. One is certainly the amount of funding that we have from HUD, which is unknown at this point. Projects will be ranked according to our project priority ranking policies, which are still in development. They will be, the plan is for the board to approve them in July. But within those ranking policies, we'll determine if projects are ranked in tier 1 or tier 2. Projects that are ranked in tier 2 are at greater risk of not being selected by HUD for funding, as we saw earlier with those new projects from last year's competition, which were in tier 2 and were not funded. So I can't say at this point what our ranking policies are going to look like for this year, but just know that due to the fact that we have to rank projects, we don't know how much funding overall will be available. Also, project funding also depends on your own project's performance as well. As we saw last year, we did have some projects that had their budget reduced in part due to some concerns with performance issues. So there's, again, a number of factors that come to play when it comes to renewal funding, where we just can't guarantee full funding of or continued funding of these projects. I touched on this briefly, but again, so projects must earn at least 70% of the points possible in order to be submitted to HUD for funding. That 70% is the threshold that we expect for our projects to earn. Projects that are below threshold can submit an appeal, and if that appeal is granted, then they may still be submitted for funding. And again, I'm going to talk about the appeals process a little bit later on in the presentation here. Okay, let me touch briefly on first and second time renewals. So, and what I'm talking about, really everything that I'm talking about here is in a lot more detail in the application materials as well that were sent out. But so first or second time renewals, these are projects that have had less than 12 months of operation in 2023. They may also, again, be a project that have not started operations at all. Again, that applies to the one new project we had funded last year, which has not yet received their grant agreement from HUD, but still needs to be submitted for renewal. So the reason why we still need these projects to submit for renewal is because we need to have, kind of a mechanism to know, okay, you do want continued funding. And so our way of knowing that is by you submitting your renewal application. In the application materials, again, and I'll be kind of going over this a little bit later on, there is an Appendix B, which provides a full list of all of the renewal projects that do need to be submitted. So if you are wondering, what are the projects that I need to submit? Which ones do I need to turn in? You're going to look at that Appendix B to see the list of projects that your agency needs to submit. If you notice any errors in that appendix, I did notice one error already, which I will be reaching out to the agency in particular about it. But if you see anything that looks amiss in terms of the list of projects that you are anticipating have to be renewed, please let me know and we can talk about that. So when we are scoring your renewal applications, the time frame that we are looking at is calendar year 2023. So we're looking back over what happened over the course of calendar year 2023. This is for most of these your projects. This is not your project term. Our projects have different terms. Some have a July to June. Some are October to September dates. Everyone kind of has different operating terms. And so a number of years ago, we made the decision to evaluate our projects based on a calendar year so that we're looking at the same time frame when we're evaluating projects for everyone. So that's why we're looking at all of the data that we're going to be looking at is based on calendar year 2023. When we developed the evaluation and scoring criteria, there were some considerations that we undertook. So we looked at the criteria from last year's competition, which looked back on 2022. We looked at not only that criteria, but we looked at overall average performance from that 2022 timeframe. We then also ran some preliminary data looking at how projects have been performing over 2023 to get a sense of kind of where folks are at with their performance. We also relied on some work that a consultant did with us several years ago called Housing Innovations on some recommendations that they have made in terms of our scoring and evaluation criteria. So after doing all of that work, and that was really done through the Values and Funding Priorities Committee, the renewal application, the renewal criteria was sent out for public comment late March, mid-April. So folks were able to review that criteria and make comments. And then the comments received and the responses we made to those comments are all posted on our website if you want to know kind of what comments were made. But this is just kind of a, so also the Values and Funding Priority Committee reviewed those comments, developed those responses. Ultimately, the COC board is the entity that approved all of this evaluation criteria. That was approved at their May board meeting. But just wanted to kind of give some of that background in terms of how we sort of got to this point. All right, I'm going to switch over to the application packet. While I do this, just pause to see if there's any questions at this point. I don't see anything in the chat. I will just pause for a moment if anyone has any questions, anything I can clarify. Okay. All right. So with that, I'm gonna just start going through this document that you see. So this is a 61-page document, so I'm not going to be going over all of it in detail. This is posted on our website. It was sent out to everyone as well. I sent it out on Monday. So hopefully you may have had a chance to review it or skim through it. This is really going to be, this document and everything in it is really what you're going to want to keep handy and refer to as you're putting together your application. So again, there's a lot of details in here that we're not going to spend the time to going over each and every one of them today. I trust that you can all take the time and read this on your own, but there are some things that I do want to be sure to highlight, particularly some things that may have changed from last year. So, but as I'm going through this, if there's anything in particular that I don't touch on that you have questions about, again, please feel free to raise those questions. So I'm going to be doing some scrolling, so apologize. Hope that makes you, hopefully it won't make you too dizzy. So while this is a relatively lengthy document, the good news is that a lot of the materials here, about almost sort of the last half of the document or so, last 20 pages, are these appendices. So the appendices are additional information that we provide It's a way that we really try to be transparent to our agencies about what it is we're looking at when we're evaluating you, what data we're looking at, all of that. So, the appendices are like bonus material that you can review. But really, you're going to want to, and again, there's a lot of background information here, information on the timeline that you'll want to attend to. So what I'm going to focus on really is the scoring criteria. So in this section here, starting in the section 7, give a high-level overview of changes that we have made to the scoring criteria from last year. And I will say there are really only 2 new scored criteria elements that have been added this year. And one of them is for bonus points, which we'll talk about later. And the other new one is participation in the unsheltered point in time count, which everyone participated in that. So the new ones that we've added are easy to achieve. Let's just say that. So really the majority of the changes that we made to the scoring criteria this year was modifying some of the items that we scored you on from last year. So if that eases any concerns that we're adding a lot of new things this year, we really try to be mindful about if we add a new element, we try to do so in a way where maybe it's something that has been an informational only question for the prior years or a bonus point in prior years. We really try to avoid kind of springing something on agencies that is, unexpected or brand new and make that a scoring criteria. The table that you see then starting on page 5, this is really just kind of an overview of all of the scored components and the point value of each broken out by project type. So if you want just a high level overview of, for your project type, what are the points that I can earn? That's going to be on this table here. And but then we go into a lot more detail on how these projects are scored as well. I want to pause and talk about the deduction of points for late, incomplete, or incorrect submissions. So there are different value of points that can be deducted if something is submitted to hands late, or if what is submitted is not the correct item and we need to go back to you and get the correct item. If the item that's submitted late is something that I can otherwise get on my own, the prime example would be your A133 audit. I can that is publicly accessible through the Federal Clearinghouse. I have pulled those down before when an agency has not submitted their most recent audit. So in those instances, you would have 1 point deducted because you still submitted the incorrect item, but I was able to get it on my own. However, if the late or incorrect item that is submitted is something that I can't get on my own, something that can only come from your agency, then there's a 3-point deduction because there's just sort of like an extra level of work. I need to go back to you as the agency to get it for you to submit it to us. So I'm going to be talking a little bit later on as well about kind of some tips to make sure that you're submitting the correct attachments. But I would just ask that you do be mindful of the checklists that are within the project applications to make sure that you are submitting everything that you need to submit and that you are submitting the correct items. All right, starting in page 8 of the packet, again, this really goes into all of the details of the scoring criteria. So it breaks it down by the component. So whether we're looking at mainstream resources and income, your housing outcomes, financial performance, give details on the scoring scale. So how many points you can earn. Sometimes there's different scales based on different project types. So just want to be mindful if you're looking this over that you're looking at the right scale for your project type. And it gives some detail as well in terms of what this measure is looking at. So again, this is information. This is just our way of communicating to you as the agency, what are these criteria that we're scoring you on, and then, what are the points that can be earned. All right, some things that I want to highlight. Highlight some things that are different from last year. So there is a score criteria that we look at for our PSH and our rapid rehousing projects on the length of time that it takes to move people in from the project start date to their housing move-in date. This is the length of time measure. This is data that we provide quarterly to the PSH and rapid rehousing work groups. And so the way that we look at this data, or the way that we evaluate projects, will depend on your project type. Particularly, right now I'm really mean for PSH projects. There's different scoring scales. I'm sorry, that's what I'm trying to say, based on your project type, because we know that, for example, a single room occupancy project, as you can see, their overall average, they can typically move people in very quickly, versus projects that are scattered site or project-based and you have LIHTC attached to it. There's typically just a longer period of time that it takes to move people in. So we have different scoring scales based on the project type. We look at the overall average for that project type, and that's how the scale is developed kind of accordingly. It's based on the average. So one of the changes that we made to this measure has to do with a project being able to demonstrate improvement in their performance from last year. So what this highlighted area is goes into this in more detail. So if your project on this performance criteria last year, if you earned 0 points, so you would need to kind of go back and pull up your scoring sheet from last year. If you earned 0 points last year, and if based on your performance this year, you would also earn 0 points. But if there was an improvement of at least 10% from last year to this year, your project can earn 2 points. So there's a couple of different criteria that need to be met there, right? You need to have earned 0 points last year and 0 points this year, which means your project has a relatively long length of time. But if there was improvement of at least 10%, then you can get a couple of points. So we added this for both the PSH and for the rapid rehousing projects. We added this based on some feedback that we've heard from providers. We also incorporated it just to try to promote individual project improvement, really encouraging agencies to think through steps that your agency can take to try to improve performance. And for those agencies that have improved their performance but maybe are still struggling, we wanted to be able to acknowledge that and award some points accordingly. So that is a change. I will say, kind of the caveat to this, if your project earned some points on this last year, but you earned 0 points this year, you would still earn 0 points this year. So this, again, really only applies to if you earned 0 points last year and would otherwise earn 0 points this year, then you would get those 2 points. All right, so I wanted to make sure that we kind of explained that piece of it. A similar change that we made was for the returns to homelessness measure. So this measure looks at, and this is one of the more complicated measures that we look at, but essentially we look at people who exited your project. And again, this is for PSH, it really is for all projects, I should say, who exited the project. This one, we pull in the last few months of 2022. So someone exited from September 1st of 2022 through the end of December of 2023. So within that, 15-month time frame, if they exited to permanent housing and subsequently returned to homelessness within 6 months of that exit. That's the kind of the group of folks that we're looking for. So ultimately, what we're looking is to see that people did not return to homelessness within 6 months of that exit. So again, the change that we made, similar to for the length of time one, was that if a project earned 0 points on this measure last year, would be otherwise earn 0 points this year, but showed a performance of at least 3%, then the project can earn 1 point. So again, the kind of logic or rationale is the same. We wanted to be able to acknowledge that some agencies may have made improvements in this measure over the past couple of years, but they might still be struggling in a way, but we wanted to at least give an opportunity if there has been any improvement. So I will pause there because this is sort of a new thing that we're doing this year, just to see if anyone has any questions or if there's anything I can clarify on this piece.
So Amanda, on this return to homelessness, this is still based on the number of people that are in a household versus a household to household return. So for example, if a household had 1 person in it versus a household who had 8 people in it, 8 people would be a part of this scenario. That would, you're doing better if you only have a single person returning to homelessness versus a household with 8.
Okay, yeah, so this is looking at people, not households, but I will say, I hear what you're saying, maybe thinking like, yeah, an 8-person household is going to make your returns look worse than a 1-person household. But to keep in mind that the denominator that we are then using is also all people. So we're using the same, so it's, I don't know, I'm trying to come up with the words to explain it. The sort of the denominator of what we're going to be looking at are all people compared to all people who may have returned, which would be comparable to if we looked at just all households versus all households. I'm not sure if I explained that well, but yes, Candace.
Good morning, thank you. 2 questions. Going back up to the very beginning when you talked about leavers with income.
Sure.
What if you have no leavers?
Yep. So we have some protocol built in, and this is explained in this document here, that if a measure is based solely on leavers, then what we would do instead is look at the stayers for that measure. This happens on occasion. It's not super common, but it does happen within our PSH project sometimes, where they may not have anyone leave over the course of the year. So in that case, we look at, typically all measures have, leavers and stayers. So in those instances, we would look at the stayers rather than the leavers.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
The second question was on the, oh my God, it was not this one, but the one before, I think it was C. And you talked about that improvement, that 10%, if you add a 0. So it's based on improvement. What if you had out of, I don't know how many points you can get off this one. Just let me throw something out there.
Sure.
Say you can get 10 points. I think that's what you can get. You can get 10 points.
Yeah.
And you get 5 points. And this year you get 5 points. Does the 10% apply to you in that instance?
No, the improvement points only apply if
it was 0.
0 points last year, and you would have otherwise received 0 points this year.
Okay, so it doesn't apply if you just made any improvement. It's just for 0.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. A couple of comments in the chat. So Caitlin's question, are return to homelessness rates checked across the state or just re-entry into Wayne County? So it's actually just into if people return back into the Detroit CoC services. So not even the entire Wayne County, because we're pulling this data from HMIS. So we're really only going to be, and we can only see, if people return to a Detroit homeless provider within our HMIS system. So, if someone returns to homelessness, but they're in Wayne County, or if they're in Macomb or Oakland, that's not taken into consideration. So for Damon's question, does it count against the program when the household member returns to homelessness as opposed to the head of household? So Okay, well, the household member. So really what we're looking at is, I would say yes. I might need to, I think both Damon and Jean's question are related to this returns to homelessness one. So with your permission, I'm going to put a bit of a pin in that one and we'll come back to that. I want to make sure I get you clear answers to your question. So that. And then Tasha's question, is there a penalty to PSH projects that we're not able to get a person into housing and had to close them? And yep, HMIS is going back to homelessness. So that's a great question, Tosh. Let me address that. So this is a question that does come up a lot. So for the, I'm scrolling up a bit. So one of the kind of biggest areas of points that for all projects can earn are these, well, right now we're looking at PSH. So this is retention and permanent housing. So this is looking at people who either stay in their permanent supportive housing program or exit to other permanent housing. For rapid rehousing, joint component projects, TH projects, that's looking at just exits to permanent housing. So for this measure, we do exclude some people from the measure. So we exclude anyone who had kind of exits of the following kind of 5 exits. If they passed away while they were in the program, so the exit is to deceased. If they exited to foster care, if they exited to a hospital or a residential non-psychiatric facility, if they exited to a residential project or halfway house with no homeless criteria, or if they exited to a nursing home. So all of those individuals, they're essentially taken out of the equation completely. So they don't count for you, they don't count against you. We also remove from the calculations people who in 2023 had a project start date and a project exit date, but no housing move-in date. This is something that we've been doing for several years now. Because we acknowledge that when you get a referral from CAM and you do the project start date and you're trying to make contact with a client, trying to start the process of working with them, there may come a time where you're not able to locate them, whatever, things happen. And then you have to exit them, following kind of our protocol. And that exit, but you've never housed them. Maybe you've never actually gotten in contact with them, or maybe by the time you did contact them, they had moved on out of state or what have you, you know what I mean? So you never move them into housing. There's no housing move-in date. In those instances, those clients are also removed from the calculation. Because again, we do that based on the kind of understanding that these are clients for whom, for whatever reason, your agency just didn't work with them over the kind of the long term, I guess you could say, to really try to move them into housing. So they are excluded for the housing measures, that's retention in housing and exit to housing. This is where they are excluded. Yes. Okay. All right, great questions. And again, I've made a note that there's a couple of things we still do need to revisit about that returns to homelessness one. So Damon and Jean have made note of that. Sorry that I'm not able to answer it right now, but I will. Okay. I want to continue on through the scoring criteria, point out some other modifications that have been made from last year. So this section that's that you see highlighted, this is the rapid rehousing piece. This is the same thing as we just talked about with PSH in terms of that improvement score. It's highlighted here under the rapid rehousing section. Likewise, the returns to homelessness piece, same thing with that improvement score. I don't have this highlighted, but do want to just pause and point out this scoring criteria related to your grant expenditures. The information on how much this is looking at your most recently completed grant term. This is all given in Appendix A as well. So we have given you already the percentage that we're going to be looking at. So if you're wondering how much of your most recently completed grant have you expended to know what you'll score, that is given to you in Appendix A. I've pulled all of that information down from Sage, so you can see it there. All right, moving on to another change that we made within the HMIS section. There's a number of criteria that we're going to score your agency on as it relates to HMIS data, your data completeness, timeliness of some of your data, all of that. A couple of things I want to point out. Again, one of the appendices, Appendix C, gives for each of the agencies a list of all of the projects that you report into HMIS that we're going to be pulling some of this data on. Because there's some of these data elements that we're looking at, not just your CoC funded project, but really, I don't want to say any project because there's some caveats, but most of your other projects that you may report into HMIS. So if you're city funded rapid rehousing, city funded shelter, et cetera, may be included in some of these measures. And so we clarify that. You see, this line, the score will be based on, again, we say all projects, that's a bit of a misnomer. Most of the projects that your agency reports into HMIS will be evaluated on this component. We automatically exclude warming centers and street outreach projects from this measure. But again, you can review Appendix C. You'll see your agency name and the list of all of the projects that we're going to be including in some of these measures. And we do this, we take a broader view than just your CoC funded project for some of these, because issues of data quality, data completeness impact our entire system. And so this was one way for us to incorporate kind of that accountability factor by incorporating other projects when we looked at some of these scoring criteria. A change that I want to note that we made to this is 4F and 4G. This is a new, sorry, I'm scrolling a little too much. I'm going to stop scrolling. This is the new criteria that we added last year, for the first time last year. So I'll focus first on 4F, and this only applies to rapid rehousing and PSH projects. So every year, throughout the year, there's a quarterly exercise where agencies are asked to affirm every quarter certain data elements that, particularly around housing move-in dates, the point in time count housing move-in date audit. So this is done every quarter, and at the end of that quarter, kind of within the time frame that you get that communication from our HMIS staff, your agency is ultimately asked to affirm, is this data for this quarter accurate? Essentially, that's kind of in a nutshell. What we have found sometimes in the past is that an agency would affirm a certain set of data for a quarter, and then to find out months later that they would then change that data for that quarter that they had previously affirmed and said, this is accurate, this is up to date. So we found that to be problematic because, number one, it sort of impacts all of our system-wide reporting, but it also is problematic because it raised sort of the question of, if you had, we gave you a chance to review this data to affirm that it was accurate, given a chance to make corrections if needed before you did that affirmation. But now, kind of months later, we're being told that no, that actually was not accurate or, up to date. So it just really was starting to become a little problematic. So we added this as a scored criteria last year, where essentially we took another look and reran reports from the prior quarters to see if had anything been changed after the agency had affirmed this data is complete and accurate. If something had changed, 0 points were given. If everything was the same, 3 points were given. So the change that we made this year, this is still the same process of we're going to be going back and basically checking of, once you affirmed, after these quarterly hit dates that the data was accurate. We're still going to do that look back and checking. But the difference that we made this year is that the scale is no longer kind of an all or nothing scale. That was some of the feedback we heard from last year, really was that we didn't make room for any mistakes or didn't allow for any errors, which we may have been a little too ambitious in that regard. So the change to this is to the scoring scale. It's still the expectation is that no changes have been made to the data. What we are kind of incorporating this year is that if there was a relatively small number of changes that were made to the records, again, kind of that 6 to 19% of the records were changed, you could still earn 1 point, or even up to 5%, you could earn up to 3 full points. However, if more than 20% of those client records were changed, you would earn 0 points. So essentially, we've changed this from an all or nothing score, you get 3 points or you get 0 points, to kind of a scaled score to, again, be a little bit more responsive to what we've heard from you all as providers. So this is one of those more complex measures. I will acknowledge that. And 4G is very similar, but just wanted to note that that is a change to the scale that we've made there, which hopefully will be in y'all's favor on that side. Any questions that I can clarify on that piece? Because I know that was a bit of a more complicated one. The junior question, opportunity for the HMIS team to give providers a report on how they did after they have reviewed the reports. You mean in terms of, I mean, you will get information in your scorecard in terms of how you did. Is that what you're?
Right. I'm looking for something more current, like after, like we just turned in one, what was it, May 1st, I believe, or just prior to May 1st. It would be nice to know how we scored on that quarter, if there were any differences.
I see what you're saying. Well, so we're really not going to know that until months from now. So let me clarify. So this, and Kiana, I may call on Kiana to help me too. During the time period of when we allow for corrections to be made. You get certain data and you're asked, please review this, or please complete these elements. Is this accurate? And you do have that opportunity to say, oh, nope, I need to update this housing move-in date, or I got to exit this person because they left 2 weeks ago, or something like that. So during that sort of period of correction is not what we're looking at here. That's why we do these exercises, is to give you that time period to make those corrections. It's after those corrections are made, when you communicate, we've made all of our corrections, it's locked up, this is accurate, we've exited who needed to be exited, we did the housing move-in dates, everything is accurate. It's after that kind of affirmation that we're looking at. So
and that's what I'm talking about, after that point.
So, I mean, you will get that information when you get your scorecard. So, because we're looking back at 2023. So our HMIS team is going to be running an APR for one of these 4 PIT dates, and they're going to be comparing the APR that they run now, essentially, for this date from a year ago, and they're going to compare that data to what you said that data was last year.
Okay. Maybe this is something we can talk about at the agency administrative meeting, because I was looking at trying to get something on a more current basis, so that if there were changes made by staff in the last quarter, then we can address why that happened, instead of waiting until renewal time to get a score on something that could be going on continuously, but we don't know about it.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying. Yeah, and this might be something that may make more sense to dive into at an agency admin meeting.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. Thanks. Okay. gonna keep walking through. So everything I just said for F on looking at that for your rapid rehousing or PSH project, same thing applies. We will do the same exercise if you had a non-COC funded PSH or rapid rehousing project. That's 4G. This isn't going to apply to everyone because not everyone has that project type. If it does apply to you, it's the same exercise. We made the same change to the scoring scale where rather it being an all or nothing, we allow for some room for error there. So we'll point that out. The next change that or modification that was made is to the section as narrative responses around how your agency provides for the meaningful participation of people with lived experience of homelessness. So this is component 5B and now 5C. This is scrolling here a little bit. So last year, this was one question that was worth a total of 6 points. And it really, again, it was a narrative response where your agency needed to write an answer on how, and there were a couple of bullet points that had to be addressed on how you provide for the meaningful participation of people with lived experience. Sorry, I'm scrolling a lot here. Those responses were then reviewed by a review committee. Each individual gave a score, and then the average score was the score that you received for this response. So the change made is that this has now been broken up into 2 questions. Each of the questions is worth 5 points. So it went from one question being worth 6 points to 2 questions being worth 5 points, so 10 points total. Also, we sort of broke it up a little bit where the first question, 5B, is really honing in on the people that you're serving within your programming. And then again, there's some bullet points there that we want addressed in your response. 5C, sort of the second part of the question, looks at the participation of people with lived experience of homelessness within your staffing structures or your board or decision-making structures. So we tried to tease it out a little bit because we know there's some, there's different aspects that we wanted to see and we wanted agencies to respond to. So we kind of pulled those questions apart, added some additional elements that we wanted to see. So when you're drafting your responses, please be sure to look at the bullet points that we're asking you to respond to and make sure that you respond accordingly. And then you get the scoring scales are given to give you an idea of what the reviewers are going to be looking for when they read your responses. Okay. Scroll down. A lot of the remaining ones are the same as they have been in years past. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time. Sorry, I realize I'm scrolling fast here. We're just going to kind of, oops. I want to talk a bit about bonus points. Actually, I'm going to hold on here because I have some slides where we're going to go into this in more detail. But just note, one of the new items that we added this year is the ability to earn bonus points. So extra credit. I'm actually going to come back and talking about that. So the remaining of this document, kind of the remaining pages, again, it goes into a lot of detail on if you're, again, a first or second time renewal, what are these components are going to apply to you. There may not be a lot, quite frankly, starting on page 25. So if you're one of those agencies, you have a project that's renewing for the first time, and you're like, what is it that I'm even going to be evaluated on? You're going to want to look at this chart that starts on the top of page 26. It will go through component by component and really inform you on whether or not your project is even scored on it or not. Again, there may be nothing that your project is scored on. That happens just based on how these cycles work. All right, skipping down a little bit to other kind of area that I want to point out. So we discussed some additional policies and resources that are all on HAND's website. I will be switching over to our website in a minute, but those are all just kind of listed out there. Again, these are all supplemental materials for you to review and look at to help you, throughout the application process. The self-scoring tools are still in process. They will be completed by the end of this week, and they will be posted to our website by the end of this week. For those of you who may not be familiar with the self-scoring tool, this is what the permanent supportive housing self-scoring tool looks like. There will be a different tool for every project type. These tools are optional. You can completely ignore them if you have no interest in them, or you can take all the time in the world and dive into them and to your heart's content. So completely optional. If you do go through and fill this out, you don't need to turn anything into me. It's only for your use. But what we provide with these tools is we are sort of trying to pull back the curtain a little bit to really go into details of how we calculate your score. And so it's an opportunity for you as an agency to do this self-score on most of these components. Some, again, like the narrative responses are going to be a little bit trickier, but for a lot of the components where we're pulling data from your APR, you can refer to this tool to see what are the questions, what are the APR questions that we're pulling this data from, how are we doing the math to get the calculation, and then what can I expect my project to earn based on that calculation. So again, these are really detailed. You can see this one for the PSH is almost 30 pages long. This is, again, a couple of ways. One is to, well, really one of the primary needs is for us to be transparent to you as the agency, to let you know, this is how we're scoring your project. This is where we're getting the data from. This is how we're doing the math and how we're doing the calculations. So again, you can refer to these tools if that is of interest to you to do that deep dive. If you're not interested, that's totally fine. You can just disregard them, but they will all be posted to our website by the end of this week. I want to briefly, I referenced this earlier, these, well, let me come back to that. Sorry, I was going to go over the appendices, but let me talk about the applications. So what needs to actually be filled out and submitted to us? So last year, like we did last year, this year again, there's going to be your organizational application and then your project applications. So these are starting on page 32 of this packet. This document itself that you need to fill out is posted on our website in a Word format, so you can download it, fill it out, and send it to me. So the first part of this that everyone has to complete is an organizational application. You're going to complete one of these and submit one copy of these attachments that apply. Regardless of how many project applications you may have, you're only going to do one organizational application for your organization. So this checklist that starts on page 32 goes over, again, the documents the attachments that need to be included with your organizational application. There may be some attachments that don't apply. If an attachment does not apply, it's really important that you put an X in that not applicable column. So best example might be an A133 audit. Not everyone is required to do the A133 single audit. It depends on how much federal funding you expend. So if you don't have to do the A133, that's not going to apply. Put an X in that column. That way I'll know that I shouldn't be looking for that when you turn in your application materials. Likewise, with these monitoring reports, what we're looking for are monitoring reports either from the city of Detroit for your homeless program funding or monitoring report from HUD for your CoC funding. But we're only looking for monitoring information from March of 2023 to March of 2024. So largely kind of within the last year, that time frame. So that's really what we're looking for. If you don't have anything that falls within that time frame, then again, select that not applicable column. This may in particular be if you, for your CoC monitoring, we know HUD monitors you every, 3 to 5 years. So you may not have been monitored within that time frame. So just select not applicable. But again, please review this checklist closely to make sure that you're submitting what needs to be submitted or you're indicating not applicable for anything that does not apply. The organizational application itself is hopefully pretty straightforward in terms of what it's asking for. Some things maybe you may just respond NA because it may not apply. But just ask you, walk through these questions and answer them appropriately. All right, so question 4 and question 5 are these narrative responses that need to be answered regarding how you meaningfully incorporate people with lived experience of homelessness. So for the questions that you have to type a narrative response to, I've indicated if this is a scored criteria and what scored criteria it relates to. So obviously, if it's worth points, you want to be sure to answer it and answer it well. There may be some informational only questions like your agency's grievance process. You'll see this little box that says this is not scored. It's an informational only question, but we do ask that you write a response. It helps us better understand your agency and your programming. Also, anything that is informational only this year may become a scored element in a future competition. So there's a number of informational only questions that you'll see there. I'm not going to go through them all. Just again, I know that you can all read and review and respond accordingly. So that's the organizational application. Then there's a project application, and that starts on page 38. So you're going to submit a renewal project application for every renewal project that you have that you're going to be submitting. So it could be 1, could be 3, could be 5. Each renewal project needs its own application and will have its own set of attachments. So some of you may be filling this out multiple times. But again, there are fewer attachments here for the project application than there is for the organizational application. It's essentially your APR. If you've had any significant changes from HUD that you need to respond to, and that the signature page. There are then some questions within the application that need to be responded to. Again, I've noted if it's a scored component or if it's just informational only. If you get to sort of the latter part of the application, you'll see these different sections that are going to only apply to certain project types. So question 6, as you can see, applies only to domestic violence only projects. And this should actually say 6, 7, and 8. Sorry about that. So if you're specifically funded for DV, you receive those DV bonus dollars, you're going to respond to those domestic violence questions. Then moving on, questions 9 and 10 are only going to apply to PSH projects. So if you're not a PSH project, you can skip these questions. You can just leave them blank. You can type in NA, whatever you prefer, but you don't need to answer them. And then questions that relate only to the CAM implementing partner, which would be CHS. These are questions specific to their role with the coordinated entry. They're going to respond to those questions. Everyone else can just skip over them. And then there's going to be the attachment signature page, attachment 15, which needs to be completed and signed for every project application. All right. And then lastly, the last kind of section of the application materials are those appendices, which are referred to kind of throughout. So again, the appendices provide additional supplemental information. Appendix B, which I referred to earlier, there's a lot of information in Appendix B. This is what I tried to cram a lot in. But Appendix B is number 1, it's the list of projects that you need to submit to me. As I noted earlier, I did find a slight error with, and I see folks from CAS here. CAS, I forgot to, Brady project is all combined at this point. I'll reach out to CAS separately to note that error that I made. But regardless, if you're again wondering which project applications you need to submit, look at Appendix B. There's additional information here around ensuring you're writing your report for the right HMIS ID number. And then when it comes time, when we're looking at your length of time to housing data, we give also how we categorize your project, whether it's SRO, scattered site, et cetera. So again, please review that information. Okay. All right. Any questions on that? We do have some more information to go over, but anything in the immediate of what I reviewed there that I can clarify? permissible to completely separate the organizational from the renewal. When you say completely separate, if you mean kind of turn them in separately, I mean, if you want to, I mean, maybe what you mean, like you wanted to have like one PDF or one Word document that's just the organizational, and then one Word document that's just the renewal project application, that's fine. Yep, if that's kind of what you mean by that. So yeah, I know you may have different people that have to work on them within the agency, so that's fine. Yep. And this might become a little bit more clear in terms of what I mean when I talk about some kind of tips on how to email this stuff to me. That might help answer your question too. Okay, I want to talk a bit about this bonus points opportunity. I alluded to this earlier. This is a new opportunity. We did bonus points a number of years ago. We're sort of bringing it back. So again, as I mentioned, it's a bonus point opportunity this year. It may become a scored criteria in a future competition, but this year it's just like extra credit essentially. So you can, an agency can earn 3 bonus points. It's either 3 or 0. It's kind of an all or nothing. If the agency submitted all 3 of your quarterly HMIS audits on time in 2023. So the details of the dates of those audits and when they were due, that's given on page 25 in the application materials. But essentially our HMIS staff are going to be confirming whether or not they were submitted by the due date of when you were asked to submit them back in 2023. So again, these are points that can, if you hit all of those due dates, you can earn 3 points. If you didn't hit all 3 of them, even if you only got 2 of them, we won't be able to earn those extra bonus points. So this is an all or nothing one. Because they are bonus points, this means that technically a project could earn a score greater than 100%. So I gave one kind of example in the application materials, but just walk through another example of how these bonus points would work. So in this example, we have, PSH, a renewing PSH project can earn 131 points. That's sort of the standard number of points that a PSH project can earn. So in this example, this PSH project earned 129 out of 131 points. So it's performed very well at 98%. They also got the 3 bonus points because they turned in each one of those HMIS reports on time last year. So they got those 3 bonus points. So now their final score is 129 plus 3, which is what, 132 over 131. So they get 101% essentially. So this is an example of kind of how with those bonus points could earn more than 100%. So it's definitely hopefully to the advantage that you've gotten those reports in on time. But again, because they're bonus points and not part of kind of the standard score, even if you did not get them in on time, it's not going to hurt you, suffice to say. So for example, kind of again, in this example, even if this project had not gotten those 3 points, they still would have gotten the 129 out of 131. So again, we wanted to, the reason why we added this this year was really just to acknowledge that some agencies just did a great job of getting everything in on time when we asked for them. And we just wanted to acknowledge that and hopefully encourage future timely submissions of those HMIS reports. And you basically see a theme with timely submission of HMIS data. It's just really key to all of the systems reports that we run. It's really key for you as your own internal reporting that we get these things in on time. Okay, any questions about the bonus points? So again, I know this is a new thing that we've added this year. Okay. And Katie, I see your comment. So the signature page is only for the project application. There's no signature page needed for the organizational application. It's just going to be for each project application. It's attachment number 15, and you'll see that attachment number referred to in the checklist for the project application checklist. Okay. The next thing I want to talk about is the appeals policy. So when we do these webinars every year, I don't often go into the detail of the appeals policy or the appeals process, but I wanted to take some time to do so today, just because there were some changes made to the appeals policy from last year. And so I wanted to just kind of make sure we're all on the same page about this. So the COC board approved some updates to the appeals policy at their May board meeting. The full policy is posted on our website, so you can certainly read through it there. So yeah, you can read through the whole thing there. But what I wanted to bring to this group or let you know about today is one of the changes that was made regarding the appeals process if a project falls below the scoring threshold. So I'm going to kind of run through this diagram here. First, I'm going to go through what the former policy, so what the policy for last year's competition looked like. Then we're going to go through what the changes are. So kind of we'll start with the different steps from the former policy. So starting off, so once you receive your project scores, you then, at that same time that you get your project scores, which will happen, I think we're looking at probably late June, July-ish, you will get information on the appeals process. So particularly if your project scored below that 70% scoring threshold, you would have to have an appeal granted in order to be submitted for funding. So starting off, let's say a project received their score was below 70%, and they submitted that appeal. The appeals committee reviewed that appeal, and based on their review, the appeals committee recommended a reallocation of the project. So this is kind of sort of the starting point that we're starting with here. So appeals committee has recommended reallocation. This is the former policy. What would then happen is that recommendation would go to the board, and the board would then make a decision on whether to approve that recommendation or not. So if the board approved that recommendation for reallocation, at that point, we have a reallocation decision that has been made. In the former policy, then, what would happen is that agency would then have an opportunity to appeal that reallocation decision. So they could submit a second appeal to the appeals committee. The appeals committee would then review that second round appeal and make a second recommendation to the board to either uphold their reallocation decision or change their reallocation decision. The board would then make a second decision on that recommendation, and that would then be the final decision. So this is how the process looked last year and in prior years. So the change that has been made to the policy, the starting point is really the same. An agency fell below the scoring threshold. They submitted an appeal to the appeals committee. The committee reviewed that appeal. And in this instance, they made a recommendation for reallocation. That recommendation goes before the board, and the board makes a decision on that recommendation. Again, in this instance, they're making a decision to approve the recommendation for reallocation. This is then the final decision. So essentially what we have changed is we have taken out that sort of second round of process to the appeals process. And we've streamlined the process. So really there's just one appeal that is submitted to the appeals committee, and then one decision that's made by the board. So again, it eliminates that second round process. One thing that we did add to the policy for this then is that if the appeals committee is going to recommend reallocation, that recommendation needs to have at least 75% of the committee members supporting it. We wanted to have that kind of high bar there because of the ramifications of reallocation. So again, the full appeals policy is on our website. When it comes time, when the appeals process kicks off, more information is provided regarding specific dates and timelines and all of that. But I wanted to just kind of point out and bring to this group this change that was made to the appeals policy this year, because it may impact some of our projects this year. It may not. Hopefully it won't. Hopefully no one will fall under threshold, and that won't even be something that needs to be gone through. But wanted to take a moment to go through that. Any questions about that? Yes, Jane.
I commend you for refining or putting that detail regarding 75% of the committee must approve the reallocation suggestion that would be pitched to the board.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Okay. So want to move on. So what section am I in? Material submission. Key things to keep in mind. I feel like this is also sort of a tips and tricks / potpourri section. Thinking of my Jeopardy categories. Okay. Wanted to take a moment to talk a bit about what we have seen in the past when projects have lost points for submitting incorrect materials. I referenced this kind of earlier at the top of my presentation about how points can be deducted if things are submitted late or the wrong things are submitted. This is really hopefully easy to avoid. And so I wanted to point out some things that we have seen in the past and to hopefully you can avoid those occurrences. So one thing to keep in mind, if you completely miss the application deadline, which is June 14th at noon, if you don't turn anything in by that deadline, nothing at all, there will be a significant number of points reduced from your project score so that it may be mathematically impossible for you to pass the scoring threshold, even if your project performs beautifully on your housing outcomes and your income and employment outcomes. Even if you are like top tier in your performance, if you turn everything in late, it just, again, it may be mathematically impossible for you to pass the scoring threshold. So please don't do that. And again, late means anything after 12 p.m. On June 14th. So do not wait until 11:59 to hit the send button to me through email. Okay. I talked about this earlier, but again, so if you do not submit the correct attachment, and if I need to get that correct attachment from you, or again, if I can get it elsewhere, again, there will be points deducted. When you send your information to me, you will get a confirmation email from me confirming that I have received your email and I've received the attachments. It is not going to confirm that I have reviewed everything. I mean, you know, I'm getting lots of emails up in the day of and running up to the 14th. So your email confirmation is simply saying your email has been received. Thank you. So just kind of be mindful of that, of kind of what that confirmation email means. So here's some common ways that some points have been lost in the past. So submitting the incorrect agency financial audit or a 133 audit. And by incorrect, meaning not your most recent. So I realized that the font is rather small. I apologize for that. But here's kind of maybe how to prevent not submitting your most recent audit. I would say review what you submitted to us last year. And I'm saying this with the assumption that within your internal record keeping process, you have record of what you submitted to me last year. Maybe you kept a copy of the email that you submitted, or somehow in your files, hopefully you have a record of this is what we sent to hand last year with our application material. So I would say, look at that to see what is the date on the audits that we submitted to hand last year. Ask the appropriate people within your agency, hey, do we have a more recent audit, or is this you know, or not? And then if one is available, submit that one and turn that into me. So here's kind of an example of what I mean by this. So here for example, if last year, if an agency submitted to me your financial audit for your fiscal year that ended June 30, 2022, well, in this example, that's what they did. So June 30, 2022 audit was what was submitted. This year, in the application materials, I see that the audit is also June 30, 2022. And I know this is the same audit that was submitted last year. So I'm going to go back to the agency and say, hey, do you have an audit that's been completed and final for your fiscal year that ended June 30 of 2023? The agency comes back and says, oh, we do. Actually, sorry, I sent you the wrong one. Here's the June 2023 audit. I'm going to say thank you very much. And then you will have points reduced from your application because should have sent me that 2023 audit initially. If, however, when I do this, I ask the agency that question and they say, no, we have not yet completed the audit for June 2023. We know sometimes audits take longer to complete than what you anticipate. The June 2022 audit is still the most recent one. Then I'll say thank you and no points will be deducted. So there may be some back and forth here in terms of if I'm asking if this is your most recent, and depending on if it is the most recent, then that's fine. But if it's not, and you accidentally sent me the wrong one, then again, there will be points deducted. So please be mindful of that. So John, I see your question. If you submitted 2021 last year and it's complete, do you need, oh, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever had that question before. We just kind of skip a year. I would say submit your your most recent one. So your FY23 one, because that will be your most recent one that's been completed. Yep. Thanks. So I guess my point, like sometimes like going back and forth and getting some clarification is not necessarily a bad thing and isn't going to necessarily cost you points. What would cost you points is essentially if you realize like we did not submit the correct thing at the time that it was needed. That's really where the points could be reduced. So another kind of common way that I saw agencies lose points was with the signature page. So again, this is attachment 15, and you're going to need a signature page for each one of your project applications. So if you have multiple project applications, you're going to have multiple of these signature pages. They will probably all need to be signed by the same person. So you will probably annoy whoever it is that you're being asked to please sign these 5 documents, but that's the name of the game. You will note on these signature pages, though, that there is a line for the project name that you're being signed to. The name that you give, the project name, needs to be the same as that project application that it is being submitted with. So if this project name and the signature page is not the same as the project application that it's being associated with, that's going to be considered as the wrong signature page. Or if that project name is blank, it's the wrong signature page. And the reason why is because the signature that's being attached to that page affirms things about that project. It's affirming that the data for this project is complete. It's confirming that we will comply with the regulations for this project. It's confirming things specific to that project for that signature page. So it's really important that the project name on the signature page is the same and corresponds to the project application it's being associated with. The other thing that we sometimes have seen, although agencies have gotten better with this, is the documentation of a person with lived experience on your board or equivalent decision-making entity. Submitting a board roster is appropriate and fine. What does need to be kind of indicated on that board roster is who that individual is, that is the person with lived experience. Sometimes a board roster will just be a list of names and maybe an agency that they're affiliated with, or sometimes it's just a list of names. It needs somehow to be communicated, you know, of this list of names, this is the person on our board who is the person with lived experience, just so I know that. Do give the caveat here that we have some agencies may have a policy of not disclosing that information. It's somewhat personal information. So you can also submit a letter signed on agency letterhead attesting that you do have that person on your board, but just for privacy's sake, you're not disclosing their name. That's appropriate as well. Okay. So those are just, those were a couple of tips on some things that we've seen in the past in terms of that aren't always clear that have cost agencies points in the past. So I'm looking at Tomlin's comment for see a signature page separated as an attachment or as the last page of the renewal application or both. I really, Matt, it could go either way. I don't have a preference, just so that it is clear which project application it's being associated with. So I want to talk a minute about the APRs that you're going to be submitting. I alluded to this a little bit earlier. You're going to be, almost all projects, there are some caveats, but almost all projects are going to be submitting an APR that's been generated for the calendar year of 2023. To make sure you're running the APR for the right project number, I gave those HMIS project numbers in Appendix B. So again, if you submit the wrong APR, that's going to cost you points. So double check that you're running that APR for the right project number or the right HMIS ID number and sending that in to me. Again, you're running it for a calendar year. This is not going to be probably not going to be the same as your project term. So just be sure to run it for the correct dates. When you're, printing your APR or saving it as a PDF, saving it as a PDF to, so you can email me, just please be sure that none of those columns get cut off. It may mean you may need to switch to like landscape view or just, make sure that everything is readable and legible when you send it to me. That's the only data that you'll have to submit. There's other data that the HMIS team and hand staff will be running, other reports that we'll be generating to get data to evaluate your projects. We're going to be starting to run those reports this month. Again, we're looking at data from 2023. So there's not really like data cleanup period because this data is a year old by now. So we expect it to be accurate. That's why we do all of those data cleanup exercises. So we're starting to run reports now for some of these evaluation criteria. If you need assistance from the HMIS help desk for any piece of this process, you need to submit that request through the help desk, indicate that it has to do with your renewal application. Any requests for assistance that are received after June 7th may not be addressed in time. So please plan accordingly. If you do need some kind of assistance from the HMIS team, get those requests in sooner rather than later. Again, anything received after June 7th, they can't guarantee that they'll be able to respond to it. Okay. Last section here is some email submission tips and tricks on, because again, you're going to be emailing all of this information to me, and particularly if you're an agency that has multiple project applications, wanted to provide some tips on how to send all of this stuff through email in a way that makes it clear to everyone of what you're submitting and what's attached to all of these emails. So these are some tips that I have found to be helpful in the past. So the first one would be assemble your completed project application. You can include the organizational application in there too. Basically, assemble it all into one PDF file. Scan that PDF file as one PDF attachment, or within the PDF software, you can attach things. Basically, put it all together as one PDF and email it to me. That is one way to do it. That's a way that some agencies do it, and it works well. Another tip, and I've given some screenshots here to hopefully kind of help illustrate what I'm talking about. And again, in these next two examples, these are from examples for agencies that have had multiple project applications. So another way that you might want to do this is to create a zip file a separate zip file for your organizational application, and then a zip file for each of the project applications. So in this example, this agency had, you can see their overall agency application. So in this zip file, they had that organizational application and then all the organizational attachments. So their audits and their board roster and all of those organizational attachments were in this one zip file. They then had 3 project applications, each of those project applications had its own zip file. So in this file was the project application, the APR for that project, and then the signature page for that project. And then same thing for the other two. So it was really clear to me what I was receiving and what I could expect to find in each of those zip files. Another option is to send multiple emails, which is totally fine. I have some agencies I'll get, 5 or 6 emails because that's what it takes to get all of the stuff to me, which is fine. You don't, feel like you have to get it all in one email. Especially if you have a larger attachment, we, want to try to avoid the risk of things not going through if the attachment's large. So in this example, this is an agency, likewise, they had multiple project applications. They ended up sending me 3 emails to get it all to me. And I knew that I was going to get 3 emails. They made it clear. And this email 2 of 3, they explained to me what they were attaching. It was blocked out the agency name and project names, but I knew it was, project blah, 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 with the signature page and the APR for that project. And then the other project signature page, APR for that project. So this agency had multiple projects. So in this email, they sent me information for 2 of their projects. In another email, they sent me their organizational application and attachments. And then in their 3rd email, they sent me the rest of their project applications and attachments. So again, kind of separating things out like that sometimes can make it a lot easier for me, selfishly, to know what I'm receiving, but also hopefully help for you. So before you hit that send button, you can review, okay, this is what I said is attached to this email. Are those the attachments that I see? That can be easier to do if you have, a fewer number of attachments that you're trying to look through. So these are just some options, again, some tips on how to submit things in a way that's sort of clear for everyone. Everything that we've talked about today, the application materials, everything is posted on HAN's website. Pretty sure everyone is pretty familiar with this website by now, but the link is there. So you'll want to bookmark this site. Again, the self-scoring tools, which will be completed by the end of this week, will be posted there also. The renewal application in Word format is here, so you can download it to your computer to fill out and send in. A little bit farther down here on the website, we have, sorry, this is a little small. I did post the policies and other information. So again, the full appeals policy, the comments we received to the appeals policy, comments that we received to the renewal evaluation criteria. Once the project priority ranking policies are done, they will be posted here as well. So essentially everything will be on our website. So Tash, to see your questions, to the program name be the HUD name or the simple name? I like to keep things simple, so I would say keep it simple. Yeah, keep it simple. And Darlene, for questions that are not scored this year, is there a benefit to completing them? Is there a punishment for not completing? So that's a great question. So there are a number of informational only questions, so they're not scored, right? Benefit to completing them is that you have done what we asked. Really, is there a penalty? No, there's not a penalty because there's no points attached to it. We would ask that you do complete them because it provides us with helpful information about your agency and about your programming. Again, will you lose points if you don't complete them? No. So we just ask that you do, though. All right. So finishing up here, rounding the bend again, everything is due by noon on the 14th. Hopefully that has been made clear throughout. I realized that I have not fully circled back to Damon and Jean's question about this kind of returns to homelessness. I think it may make more sense for me to follow up with you through email, if that's okay. I want to be sure that I can clearly kind of demonstrate and talk through your response, which I'm nervous I won't be able to do a good job of that here on the webinar. So for both Damon and Jean, I'm going to respond to your questions through email about that returns to homelessness data point. Any other questions, clarification that I can provide here on the call? And I will say, while you're thinking of your questions, as you start working on your applications, as you're going through the materials, you can please feel free to reach out to me through phone or email. I'm assuming folks know how to get a hold of me, but I would really much rather have you ask questions about what attachment you need to include or how to do this certain part of the application. Please ask that question now while we're doing this process, rather than, you know, not doing something correctly. If you ask a question that I can't answer, I'll just tell you that I can't answer it. But I would, I welcome those questions, and I would rather have you ask them than not ask them, and then there be a consequence for not asking. So, but anything, if there's anything in the immediate that I can answer at this point. Okay. Not hearing anything. All right, I know this was a lot. I know this was a long webinar, so I appreciate you all being here, and yeah, wish you all luck as you put together these applications. I know that you'll all do a great job, I'm sure. So with that, we will close the meeting, and thank you all, and I look forward to receiving your materials by noon on June 14th. Thanks all.
Thanks, Amanda.